Welcome to our viewers watching in the United States and around the world. Thanks for joining us. I'm Robin Kerner here at CNN's World Headquarters in Atlanta. And at this hour, we are watching this. The Bahamas are being devastated by their strongest storm ever. Hurricane Dorian has been pummeling the islands for more than 24 hours now. It's packing Category 4 winds and storm surges over 20 feet in some places. But Dorian's movement is slow as it just sits over the Bahamas, you can see from these images. We know that residents are being hit over and over again. Now, the Prime Minister of the Bahamas says at least 5 people are dead, and he's calling it a historic tragedy. Take a listen.
The initial reports from Abaco is that the devastation is unprecedented and extensive. They are deeply worrying. The images and videos we are seeing are heartbreaking. Many homes, businesses, and other buildings have been completely or partially destroyed.
Meanwhile, in Florida, millions of people have been ordered to evacuate. Officials say Dorian will move dangerously close to Florida over the coming hours. At least 2,700 flights into, out of, and within the U.S. have now been cancelled so far. And we're covering the story from all the angles. Derek Van Dam is in Stuart, Florida, along the state's east coast. Nick Valencia is further north in Melbourne, Florida. And Ivan Cabrera is tracking the storm. Well, Ivan is with me here in the studio. So, Ivan, it's very slow. It is stuck over the Bahamas, and that's the problem.
It was always going to be catastrophic, Category 5 hurricane. They don't get any stronger than that. But now, you're absolutely right. It has parked itself right north of Grand Bahama, and it is just sitting there. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to move for another 10 hours. I want to show you some of these loops here. Just incredible. 130-mile-an-hour winds. Let's just set this up as far as what the update is from the National Hurricane Center. This is the latest one, 160-mile-an-hour gusts. Look at this thing. It is still hovering just to the north of Freeport in the Bahamas. I want to show you this loop here. This is a 36-hour loop. And the thing just wobbles and wobbles and wobbles, but really doesn't go anywhere. The reason for that, and remember, I remind you, hurricanes don't steer themselves. They depend on upper-level winds and the currents. And right now, we are in what could be described as the doldrums here. And it's not going to change until we get to tomorrow. And then we'll begin to see Dorian finally leaving at least Grand Bahama and then beginning that parallel trek across the eastern side of Florida. And we're going to have to watch that closely because we're still not out of the woods. Look at those outer bands continuing to come in across West Palm Beach. Stuart there. So Derek has been seeing that. Certainly nothing severe, nothing that would cause any significant damage, but just setting the stage. It's very humid out there. You get those showers, gusty winds. You know that there's a hurricane lurking out here, and there it is, kind of spinning up. All right, let's get to the track and show you what's going to be happening in the next few days. So it is going to parallel the coast, so we have those hurricane warnings in effect from South Florida all the way up into Jacksonville, and then the watches are in effect from Jacksonville all the way into the Carolinas. There we are at Tuesday, 8 p.m., finally beginning to move, and it does move to the north, not to the west, right? And so that means it'll be east of, say, Port St. Lucie by the time we get into Tuesday, 8 p.m. But notice here, it is going to take it another 24 hours to get east of Jacksonville, and then eventually that curve, which, by the way, still puts in play a potential landfall for the Carolinas that would be coming up on Thursday. As this parallels the coast, I'm not concerned about catastrophic wind damage, but I am concerned about the water. It has nowhere to go. It's going to be piled into the Florida coast, so we are going to have likely some storm surge issues here, anywhere from 4 to 7 feet. We're watching that very closely from Jupiter, Fort Pierce, Daytona, and then heading up into Jacksonville. Stuart, Florida, will be in on that as well, as far as that potential there, and some significant rainfall as well. But as far as a direct landfall hit, we've been talking about that becoming less and less of a possibility for Florida, but unfortunately now more of a possibility for the Carolinas late this week, Robin.
Okay, so we know the preps have been taken on there, but I mean, let's just spare a thought for the people in the Bahamas who have been pummeled for 36 hours, no end in sight. Category 4, Category 5 conditions. I mean, it's devastating.
Yes, the scope of that will not be known for quite some time. Once you get airplanes up and you get that aerial view, there are going to be places in the Bahamas that are just going to be completely wiped out. It's just horrible to say, but that's what a Category 5 hurricane does, and one that's parked on top of them. So there you go.
Ivan, we're going to check in with you a lot over the next few hours. Thanks a lot. So, and we're talking about Bahamas. Grand Bahama Island so far, we know, has been getting the worst of Dorian. Well, CNN's Patrick Oppman is there in the resort town of Freeport. Patrick.
Robin, it has been hours and hours of Hurricane Dorian battering the island of Grand Bahama where I am, and only now are we seeing some of the worst weather conditions. I can't tell you what an extraordinary weather event this is to have a hurricane as powerful as Dorian stall out over islands in the Bahamas that are as low-lying as where I am right now. In the last few hours, we have seen people come here searching for refuge. One woman had broken her hip and had to be carried in. Other people all shared a car because their cars were underwater. These are people who had been steadily watching throughout the day the water in their homes rise, and as the night was going down, they realized it was not safe to stay in their homes, and they came here. It's not a shelter. They just came here because it was close. They were completely soaked. We went down, gave them some towels and some water, and they're going to spend the night here because they have nowhere else to go. And that is the scene all across this island tonight. Everyone is in the dark. There is no power. The wind is still howling. There are times when it sounds like a jet engine roaring next to your head, and the storm surge remains a major concern. There was a prediction that it could raise to as much as 20 feet. That is putting much of this island underwater, and despite the fact that the Bahamas has received such punishing winds, such a battering from the storm, there is no relief in sight. Robin?
Thanks so much for that report there, Patrick Oppman. Now, as Dorian sits over the Bahamas, the next few hours are crucial in telling us where it'll go next. Derek Van Dam is in Stuart, Florida. Derek, hi. Just explain to us where you are, and of course, it's make or break in the coming hours for the Florida coastline.
Yeah, that's right. We're talking about a game of miles here, Robin. Good morning to you. Good morning to our viewers. The coast, about a mile to my east. Every 30, 45 minutes, we are getting walloped by a heavy rain shower. Outer band brings with it strong, gusty winds as the energy transferred from this powerful, powerful hurricane, still centered, by the way, about 100 miles to my east, brings all that energy all the way to the coastline, and we feel the impacts here. Now, we've seen the latest National Hurricane Center update as of 11 p.m. We know the storm has weakened slightly. One thing I want our viewers to understand is that with these weakening hurricanes, still a formidable, powerful, dangerous hurricane, but with a weakening hurricane, the actual wind field expands. So even though we may have a storm that stays offshore, the impacts will be felt, especially along the immediate coastline of Florida, Georgia, and into the Carolinas. Here in Martin County, where I'm located, where Stuart is located, Stuart, Florida, there are temporary shelters that have been set up, but they're closed down. They're no longer accepting residents here because the tropical storm force winds have set in, and it is too dangerous for them to accept residents moving about across the streets. The causeways, the bridges that connect the intercoastal, the barrier islands to the mainland, the peninsula of Florida, those are closed down because of the strong winds as well. The immediate threats here going forward as the hurricane makes its closest approach within the next 24 hours. We're expecting 5 inches or 120 millimeters of rainfall, so flash flooding. We know storm surge is a potential, especially along those susceptible areas for flooding near the barrier islands, 3 to 7 feet or 1.5 to 2 meters of potential storm surge. That will definitely cause some coastal storm surge and coastal erosion for those communities here. We're reporting live from Stuart, Florida, along the East Coast. Robin, we'll send it back to you in the studio.
Okay, thanks, my friend. We'll check in a little bit later. And let's go to Nick Valencia now. He's live this hour in Melbourne, Florida. Nick, hi to you. You've just heard Derek give us a sense of the preparations that are taking place where he is. What's it like where you are?
Robin, we're not quite seeing the rain that Derek is seeing, not quite the serious conditions just yet, but they're on their way. Right now, as I mentioned, no rain, but what we have noticed in the last hour or so is that the wind has slowly started to pick up. Behind me is the causeway that connects this part of Melbourne to Melbourne Beach and the India Atlantic Beach, where we spent much of the day yesterday. And I think what really stood out in our conversations with residents are the various attitudes, the various levels of seriousness that people are taking this storm. This track has changed so much. We've been out here for a week. We thought initially landfall was going to be Sunday night into Monday. And after the track change, showing that it would not make a direct impact on coastal Florida, I think a lot of people started to let their guard down and started to dismiss that any serious impact would be felt here. Mandatory evacuations went into effect for Brevard County, especially this part of Brevard County, at 1 p.m. yesterday. But most of the residents that we spoke to said that they were going to stick it out. And what has really stood out to us in our time here, just driving around this community, are really the lack of preparations. Some people, as I mentioned, have been taking it seriously, but many of the businesses that we saw going up and down the main roads had not taken the precautions of deploying their shutters or boarding up as late as even yesterday morning. More people have started to board up, put up that plywood, deploy the shutters, but really the attitudes towards this storm are, since this storm is not going to hit directly here, many people are going to stick it out and just say that they're going to take their chances with this storm.